All right, hello and welcome to week 6 already. Um, Going over a little housekeeping stuff real quick before we get to the lecture for this week. In the week 6 folder, we have a couple of things to point out here. We have our regular week 6 discussion board, which you will read an article and answer some questions and then respond to each other's posts. And then I also have a discussion board for the Global Awareness Project. So remember, that's the one where you either made a recipe at home or you went out to eat somewhere in the community or you got takeout from somewhere in the community and you are kind of reviewing it. It's meant to have you experience cuisine from different cultures that you maybe haven't experienced in the past. So that's in there. That's kind of the one big difference this week from previous weeks. And then I have the Unit 2 study guide for the next exam. That is posted in this folder this week as well. So yeah, the only thing really different is to make sure that you upload your Global Awareness Project in addition to your regular discussion board posts by Wednesday, and then respond or comment on 2 of your peers' posts for both the Global Awareness Project and the week 6 discussion to get full credit for both of those. If you have any questions on those things, let me know. Otherwise, we will get into the chapter for the week, which is on protein. All right, so proteins in the body, they are kind of the workhorses of our bodies. They do all kinds of things, both structurally and functionally in our cells and in our tissues. They're very, very, very important molecules. Like carbohydrates, they contain hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon, also fats. The one big difference here is that proteins contain nitrogen as well, and our other macronutrients, carbohydrates and fats, do not contain any nitrogen. So each proteins are made up of a building block called amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids that we use to build an almost unlimited number of proteins that we have. Each amino acid is composed of 2 of the same things. So they have an acid group, which is a COOH. They have an amine group, which is where the nitrogen is found. So amino for amine group, acid for the acid group. And then we have a side chain, or an R group, it's sometimes called, that is different. There are 20 different R groups. So every amino acid has the acid and the amine groups, and then each one of them will have a different side chain. So here's sort of what that looks like in kind of diagram form. You can see the difference between the green thing is what makes each of these different, the side chain there. Or sorry, the yellow thing, excuse me, my bad. All right. So like I said, all proteins consist of a chain of some combination of our 20 different amino acids. So there's 20 building blocks to build all of these proteins. When we hook the amino acids together, the type of covalent bond that we're using there is called a peptide bond. It's just the name of the bond between 2 adjacent amino acids. And when we hook 2 amino acids together, we create a dipeptide. If we hook multiple amino acids together into a long chain, we'd call that a polypeptide. So sometimes those 2 terms are a little bit interchangeable. Protein and polypeptide are sometimes used interchangeably. So protein has multiple levels of structure. The first level of structure is putting together that chain of amino acids, our polypeptide chain. So selecting the appropriate amino acids and putting them in the right order and the right combination to create a specific protein. So that's the primary structure, or the first level of structure. Now, our amino acids are interesting in that they have different properties. Some of them are, charged, some of them are uncharged, and they start to kind of interact with other areas in the chain. Amino acids will start to interact with each other and form a secondary level of structure where it might coil up into kind of a spiral. We call that an alpha helix, or it might, as it shows on the screen here, it might kind of accordion fold, kind of zigzag fold, and form what we call a beta pleated sheet. But that is all created by interactions between different types of amino acids in the chain. After that, we get the protein folds into a specific three-dimensional shape. And sometimes that's the end of the protein. So with some proteins, one polypeptide chain kinked up and coiled up and then folded into a three-dimensional shape, that will be the end of the protein. But for a protein to function, it has to take on a specific three-dimensional shape. So if we don't reach that level, or if we misfold it somehow by putting the wrong amino acid in it, then the protein doesn't fold properly and it doesn't function properly, typically. And then in some of our proteins, we have the finished protein is actually made up of multiple polypeptide chains folded into their tertiary structure, that third level structure. So hemoglobin, for example, which is what we're seeing on the screen, is actually made up of 4 protein chains or 4 polypeptide chains folded into their individual shapes and then smashed together into one functional protein. So it's the hemoglobin, like I said, is made of several separate protein chains that are then smashed together into one big functional unit. As far as our 20 amino acids, 9 of them are considered essential amino acids. And again, what we mean by essential is that the body cannot make them, so they have to be taken in the form of your diet. So it's essential to obtain them from your diet. So 9 of the 20 amino acids are essential, and then 11 are then non-essential. They're the ones that we can take other amino acids or other precursors and turn them into those 11 different amino acids. So we can synthesize those if we don't get them directly from our diet to utilize. So that's kind of the general rule there of amino acids. 9 of them are essential, 11 are non-essential. Under some conditions, some non-essential amino acids can become essential. So if there's some sort of limit to the diet, some dietary restriction or some health concern that's happening in the body, some of those non-essential amino acids might actually become essential in that we lose the ability somehow for some reason to manufacture those particular amino acids. So we then would need to take them in our diets. All right, and here's a list of the 20 amino acids broken down into essential and non-essential. Anything with the little letter B, superscript letter B next to it in the non-essential are ones that could be conditionally essential. So depending on the conditions of the body and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So like I said, for a protein to function properly, it has to be folded into a particular three-dimensional shape. And that three-dimensional shape is not held together by a true chemical bond, like an ionic bond or a covalent bond. It's held together by these interactive forces, these kind of weak attractive forces that hold together the three-dimensional shape. And that three-dimensional shape and how everything kind of gets folded up into that three-dimensional shape depends on the environmental conditions. So if we change the environmental conditions, we can actually unfold the protein and render it non-functional. So things like temperature and pH, the amount of salt, all of that kind of stuff will affect that three-dimensional shape of a protein. It can cause it to unravel, which we call denaturation. So this is important in digestion. We have enzymes and other digestive juices and stuff that help us untangle proteins to expose all those little amino acids so that we can kind of separate all of them into each individual amino acid so that they can be absorbed through our digestive tract. So there's kind of an example of what denaturation looks like. And this one, heating up the protein. So cooking protein can cause it to denature, make it a little bit easier to digest, things like that. So temperature can do that. As far as digestive processes and where they occur, we digest and absorb the dietary proteins in the stomach and the small intestine. So in the stomach, we have stomach acid. We have basically hydrochloric acid that is secreted into our stomach that denatures the protein, and it activates an enzyme called pepsin. And pepsin basically takes that long polypeptide and breaks it down into two shorter chunks, so smaller polypeptides, with maybe like 4 or 5 amino acids per little chunk there. And then when they reach the small intestine, we have more enzymes from the small intestine itself and from the pancreas that are going to further break down those smaller polypeptides into tripeptides, so 3 amino acids, dipeptides, 2 amino acids, and then 1 single amino acid, the individual amino acids, which is what we can actually absorb. So after we've digested them and absorbed them through the small intestine, they enter the blood and they travel to the liver where they are processed and sent out to the rest of the body. All right, so where do our amino acids come from? From our diet when we eat protein. When we break down and recycle other proteins in the body, that happens regularly. We can recycle some of our amino acids. And then we have a small amount of amino acids that just are sort of stored or circulate in the blood, called an amino acid pool. So it's just some, random small amino acids, individual amino acids that are floating around in the blood that can basically be used by any cell as amino acids that they need to build a particular protein. So we have a small storage of amino acids kind of in the blood, but it's definitely not the biggest source of amino acids that we have available for protein production. So we're always building new proteins and breaking down old proteins. So it's what we call protein turnover. It's a continuous process of breaking down and synthesizing proteins from the amino acids that we got from the protein that we broke down. So we're kind of constantly recycling our proteins and our amino acids in the body. As far as what we use the amino acids for, there's any number of things that we can do. So we're looking at protein turnover there. When we break down protein and when we're recycling the amino acids themselves, we're going to break down the amino acid. We're going to remove the amine group, our nitrogen containing component of the amino acid, and that's going to go to the kidneys and be filtered out of the body into our urine. So we're going to get rid of the nitrogenous waste through our urine. We actually use the amine groups to form urea, which is one of the major waste products that we get rid of in our urine. Once we've removed the amine group, it is also possible to take what's left over and burn it for energy, or we can turn it into glucose. So, or we can store it as fat. So there's any number of things that we can do with protein. Now, protein we typically use for all of these other purposes. Our bodies don't tend to burn protein for energy unless it's absolutely essential for the body to obtain energy in that way. Typically, we use our proteins as more structural and functional things, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it is possible to burn protein as fuel as well. All right, so amino acids can be used to make proteins, but they can also be used to make non-protein substances like hormones, like thyroid hormone and melatonin. Those are amino acid-based hormones that we use in the body, but they don't act as proteins. They aren't structurally, they're not proteins. They're just amino acid-based hormones. And then the second bullet point we've just talked about, so that's where we remove the amine group, which is converted into urea, and that's excreted in our urine, and then the rest of it is burned for energy, stored as fat, or made into glucose. I think we probably have learned this in other biology classes, but our DNA holds the genes, which are basically the directions for how to make proteins in the cells. So our DNA directs protein synthesis. Each cell has a copy of all 46 of our chromosomes with all of our genes on them, and each cell will express the appropriate ones and produce the appropriate proteins that they need for that particular cell needs for its own activities. So So how it does that is through two processes, transcription and translation. In the nucleus, we make a messenger RNA molecule from the DNA that is going to take the instructions for how to make that protein out of the nucleus and into the cytoplasm of the cell, where it meets up with a ribosome and another type of RNA called transfer RNA. And the transfer RNA brings over new amino acids, and it basically reads the genetic code on the messenger RNA and assembles the amino acids in the appropriate order. If we have any breakdown in this process along the way, let's say we have an error in the DNA, there's a nucleotide that's improper, or something's been deleted or something's been added, that will obviously mess up the genetic code in the messenger RNA, which means it can potentially be misread by the transfer RNA and the ribosome, and we end up putting the wrong amino acids in the wrong place, or not enough amino acids, or too many amino acids, which changes the structure of our protein, which ultimately will alter its function by changing its three-dimensional shape in the end. So, for example, we have sickle cell disease, which is a misfolding of the hemoglobin protein in our red blood cells, and it kind of impairs their ability. It alters the structure, I guess, of the hemoglobin and the red blood cell, and it impairs the red blood cell's ability to carry oxygen for the rest of our tissues. All right, that's just sort of transcription and translation, kind of a review of that for you. All right, so what do we use proteins for? Basically everything in the body. So they're structural, mechanical support. We build this really awesome rope-like protein called collagen, which is the most abundant protein in your entire body. And it makes up a lot of our connective tissue. We use collagen in basically all of our connective tissue to provide a lot of strength for the tissue. We make enzymes and hormones. Most of those are composed of proteins. Pretty much all enzymes are composed of protein. A lot of hormones are composed of amino acids or proteins. Protein also helps us maintain our fluid balance. So it basically helps to draw water back from our tissues and into our bloodstream so that we prevent too much fluid from leaking out into our tissues and staying there. If we have that, we have something called edema. In this case, we're looking at someone with what we call pitting edema. So you can see the top of the foot's quite swollen, which means that they maybe have some sort of condition. Could be a heart failure problem, or it could be, any number of things. But basically what's happening with this person is too much fluid is leaking out from the capillary beds. Not enough is getting returned into the bloodstream. So maybe they're protein deficient or something. There's not enough albumin in the blood. And the fluid stays in the tissues, and the tissues become really squishy. So you can see that little divot at the top of the foot there. That little divot is where someone has just basically pressed their finger into the tissue. And when you remove the finger, it stays there. And that's an indication of pretty severe edema in someone. Let's go back to the enzymes. Like I said, we use basically all enzymes are composed of protein. And what they do is they help to speed up chemical reactions that happen in the body. So they don't become part of the chemical reaction. They don't become changed or used up by the chemical reaction. They just grab their reactants and put them in the right kind of orientation to allow them to interact with each other and either make or break chemical bonds, depending on what the enzyme does. All right, what else do we do? Like proteins help us maintain acid-base balance by serving as buffers. It's really important that our body fluids maintain a fairly constant pH within a very narrow range. And to make sure that we don't have big swings in our pH, we have different substances in the bodies, including many proteins, that help us buffer to prevent big swings in pH. So what they can do is they can reversibly bind or release hydrogen ions into a solution to help really quickly regulate pH. Proteins are also used to transport substances through the body, so shuttling oxygen, waste products, lipids, vitamins, sodium and potassium through your body, through your blood, and also into and out of cells through the membrane is the role of many different types of proteins. They also act as part of our immune system. So our B cells, our B lymphocytes, make products called antibodies that are going to help activate the immune system and eliminate harmful substances from the body. And they are basically proteins that attach themselves to foreign substances in the body. So those are all made up of proteins. There are antibodies. Proteins can provide energy. Like I said, we preferentially use glucose and then fat, and if necessary, protein, but usually we're going to use protein for all the other stuff that it does, more than we're going to burn it for energy. And protein in your diet helps improve satiety and appetite control. Proteins take longer to digest in the digestive system, so you feel full longer, and therefore you're less likely to go and eat more calories because you feel hungry more quickly. Whereas if you eat sugar or simple carbohydrates alone in a particular meal, you're going to be pretty hungry pretty quickly after that. All right, this shows how proteins shuttle substances across a cell membrane. So that likely is also a review from other biology classes that you've had in the past. And then this is sort of a review of all the things that we just talked about there. All right, so we're going to get into the big thing because I think people think that we need more protein than we actually do. So let's talk about biologically what we need protein in our diet for. And basically a healthy adult should be in what we call nitrogen balance, where the amount of nitrogen you bring in by consuming protein and the amount that is excreted in your urine should be equal to each other. So we should be getting out as much nitrogen as we are getting into the body under most conditions. Most healthy adults just need to be in nitrogen balance. So enough nitrogen to replace the nitrogen that we get rid of in the urine. Nitrogen imbalance is where we're bringing in more nitrogen than we are excreting. And that is normal conditions in infants and children because they are growing. So they need more nitrogen to make more protein to build their bodies. And then same thing for pregnant people. People who are gestating a fetus are, building something complicated inside their uterus and require a little bit extra protein, a little bit extra nitrogen to grow a fetus. Negative nitrogen balance is where you're not bringing in enough protein or enough nitrogen, so you're excreting more than you're consuming. And what that does is it causes your body proteins to break down to balance all of that out. So examples of when someone might be in nitrogen balance, if they're very severely ill, or they have a very severe injury, or they're starving, that might be an example of someone who would be in negative nitrogen balance, which we want to correct as soon as we possibly can to help them heal and recover from their injury or illness. All right, not all protein is created equal, as this says. There's two factors that determine the quality of a protein. Number one, how digestible is it? So how easy is it for your body to break down to utilize the amino acids? And then whether it is a complete protein or an incomplete protein. So a complete protein is considered complete because it contains all 9 of the essential amino acids. Places that you're likely to find complete proteins are animal sources, eating animal meat, or soy, which is a plant-based protein, or quinoa, which is also a plant-based type of protein. Those are complete proteins, meaning that they contain all 9 essential amino acids. A lot of our other plant proteins that we get are going to be considered incomplete proteins, which means that they're missing at least one of the essential amino acids in their amino acid profile. So how you can deal with, if you're vegetarian or you're vegan, someone who does not consume animal protein in their diet, the way that you can deal with that is by consuming a fair amount of, the complete types of proteins, the quinoa, the soy-based products, things like that. But you can also get by with that by consuming what we call complementary proteins. So, for example, beans are a good source of protein, a good plant-based source of protein, fair amount of protein in beans or their legumes. But it's an incomplete protein because it's missing one essential amino acid. I don't remember which one, but one of the essential amino acids is missing when you consume just beans. Rice, decent source of protein, also an incomplete protein, but rice is missing a different essential amino acid that you have that is found in beans and vice versa. So the essential amino acid that's missing from beans is found in the rice, and vice versa. What's missing from the rice is found in the beans. So if you eat beans and rice together, you end up accounting for all of your essential amino acids because they overlap, and what one doesn't have, the other one does. So you don't have to eat them together, but just like, sort of eating a varied diet and making sure that you do consume, some rice and some beans at some point in your diet to account for all of those, in the same day, essentially. And then we have the protein digestibility index, basically, which basically scores a protein on how easily it's digested in the body. And not all protein is quite as easily digestible. So those are two things that we take into account when we consider what is a good source of protein, the quality of the protein. All right, if you want to know how much protein you need, there's a nice little math equation. You need 10 to 35% of your total daily calories. So that's our daily recommended intake. The average intake in the US is 16%, which is good. We are not by any means deficient in protein in this country. So it's not something that we really need to be concerned about. But you can also calculate for yourself what you should be getting. The general rule is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily. So, and if you're in athletics and stuff, and they're recommending an increase in protein, it's probably because they want you to kind of try to be building muscle. So a little increase in protein intake above that 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is totally normal for athletes. All right, so to calculate your daily protein needs, first of all, you need to convert your weight from pounds to kilograms. So you can take your weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2 to get your weight in kilograms, and then multiply that by 0.8 to get how many grams of protein you need per day. So for example, if you weigh 130 pounds, that's 59 kilograms. 59 times 0.8 grams is 47 grams of protein per day. And that's grams. What we were looking at before is 16% of your daily calories. And if we are consuming a 2,000 calorie diet, 47 grams, is like 23-ish% of your daily calories. All right, if you are under the age of 18, that protein need goes up. It's 0.85 grams per kilogram of body weight. The reason 14 to 18-year-olds need more, again, is that they're going through that final growth spurt. So if you're over 19, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is adequate protein intake. Goes up a little bit if you're pregnant again, but to maintain 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is adequate. All right, so where do we find the best protein? Basically, all food is going to have at least a little bit of protein in it because all of our cells use and all organisms use protein in their cells to carry out different chemical reactions. So high amounts is found in muscle. So you're going to find them in animals. So meat, animal flesh, fish flesh, poultry, bird flesh. All of those things are going to be high in protein because they have muscle, which by definition is high in protein. It's made up mostly of protein. And then in plant-based sources like beans, nuts, nut butters, and soy, like I said, quinoa also is very high. Quinoa looks like a grain, like rice or whatever, but it is not. It's actually the seed of a plant, and it's quite high in protein, and it is a complete protein as well. But here you're looking at various different types of vegetables, fruit, grain. The protein division here consists not only of animal-based proteins, but also plant sources like tofu, dried beans, peanut butter. All of these are pretty good sources of protein, as well as dairy. You can get a fair amount of protein in your dairy. All right, so question, protein supplements. Are protein supplements necessary? The short answer is not really. If your dietary intake from whole sources, whole foods, is adequate, protein supplements aren't really necessary. Protein shakes and protein powders, they have different sources depending on what you're getting. Whey protein, which is from milk, soy protein from soy, and then pea protein from peas. But depending on the type, the brand, or whatever, you can get potentially unwanted additives, maybe a lot of sugar, depending on, again, the brand and the source there. Taking amino acid supplements, anything in too high of a quantity isn't necessarily good for you. So it may have negative effects taking tons of amino acid supplements. Protein and energy bars are convenient if you're skipping a meal, but they're expensive and they're high in calories and high in sugar. Most of those are going to be high in calories and high in sugar. So if you are eating adequate sources of protein in the rest of your diet, you're eating, good plant-based sources, or you're eating meat, you really do not need protein supplementation in your diet. All right, so what if we eat too much protein? Can we eat too much protein? The answer is yes. It can increase your risk of heart disease based primarily on the amount of saturated fat you're probably consuming by eating a ton of protein. Kidney stones can form. You can get calcium loss from bones by having too much protein in the diet. And if you're eating a ton of protein, you're probably not eating adequate amounts of other stuff, plants and things like that, which have good fiber. And if you're missing out on your fiber, you run the risk of constipation, colorectal cancers, diverticulitis, all of that good stuff that we talked about with what fiber does in our diet. So you still want to consume whole grains, fruits and veggies in your diet to make sure that you're getting all of those other important nutrients, even if you are on a relatively high protein diet. All right, so this table looks at saturated fat and protein-rich foods. So where are the protein and saturated fats in your food? Meats, red meats, especially higher fat, ice cream, if it's like regular ice cream, versus light ice cream, which is a kind of a reduced fat, reduced calorie one. Whole milk has a lot of fat. Cheese has a ton of fat. Um, lean proteins are better because they're going to provide more protein and less saturated fat. But if you're eating a lot of red meat and stuff like that, that's not great for you. And you can get saturated fat in your grains if you're eating things like donuts and danishes and stuff like that. All right. Too little protein is a risk for older adults. If you don't eat enough protein, you end up with a reduction of lean body mass, meaning that your body breaks down your proteins in your bodies, which leads to increased frailty, impaired healing, decreased immune function. All of that stuff is a greater risk for older adults. Um, or you can end up with protein energy malnutrition, which is more common in children because they're growing. Kids can be picky about what they eat sometimes, or they may live in conditions that are, they have food insecurities. They don't really know where their next meals are coming from, or they're not getting high quality nutrition due to poverty and stuff like that. So that can be all of that can be more of a risk in kiddos. The results of protein energy malnutrition, one of them is called kwashiorkor. It's a severe dietary protein deficiency where you end up with edema, especially in the abdomen, abdominal edema, muscle loss, skin rashes, like thinning hair, water and electrolyte imbalances. This happens in children that are weaned a little too early and then end up eating a low protein cereal as basically their only food. So they're not getting like the, baby foods and stuff, maybe just sort of a low protein cereal. Marasmus is not only, I guess marasmus is not just a protein deficiency. It is a severe deficiency in calories. So basically starvation, where we have kids that are severely malnourished. They have very, very thin arms and legs. They have stunted growth, very little fat on their bodies. Or you can have the worst of both conditions and have marasmic kwashiorkor, which is both protein deficiency and overall caloric deficiency as well. And how do we treat that? Well, we have to fix the dietary imbalances. We need a multi-step approach. Number one is to address the life-threatening factors, because usually there's severe dehydration and fluid and electrolyte and nutrient imbalances that need to be addressed immediately because they are life-threatening. So, IV fluids and monitoring in the hospital. Step number two is to start to introduce nutritionally dense, high calorie, high quality foods with a lot of protein to start to put the weight back on, get the nutrients that they need so their bodies can grow and build themselves back up again. After that, it's going on to maintenance once they've achieved a normal, healthy weight, getting them on a regular, healthy, normal diet that will sustain them for their lifetime is kind of basically step three. All right, now I am a vegetarian and people always ask, how do vegetarians get their protein? It's not that hard. We eat adequate protein as long as you're eating a healthy, varied, whole foods diet. So we can meet our protein needs by having a variety of plant-based foods and then also eating the protein-rich meat alternatives that are soy-based or bean or legume-based, nuts. Some vegetarians eat eggs and or dairy. Ovo-lacto vegetarians will consume eggs and some dairy products as part of their normal diet. And we know that eggs are basically all protein. The egg white is pretty much all protein in eggs. So that's a good source of protein. Dairy is a good source of protein as well. This one has a list of like different types of quote unquote vegetarians. A semi-vegetarian, I would never consider an actual vegetarian. Just, they still consume meat, or I guess basically some grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, seeds, nuts, dairy, eggs. They would consume meat, fish, and poultry on occasion, so I would not consider that an actual vegetarian diet. Pescatarian, I also don't consider vegetarian because they do still eat animals, but it is an alternate one where they eat fish, but not meat from mammals or poultry from birds. Ovo-lacto-vegetarians do consume eggs and dairy, but not any type of meat, fish, or poultry. Lacto-vegetarians, just milk, no eggs. Ovo-vegetarians, just eggs, no milk. And then vegan is nothing from an animal source of any kind, which includes no dairy, no eggs, no honey, nothing that comes from or is made by an animal would be eaten by a vegan. All right, so what are the benefits of a vegetarian diet? Oh my gosh, decreased heart disease, risk of heart disease, high blood pressure and strokes, decreased risk of diabetes, cancer, and obesity. Vegetarian diets are rich in fiber and low in saturated fat and cholesterol, so it's, a pretty good overall diet. There are some nutrients that you get from animal foods that you could have potential deficiencies in. So protein, stop it. No one's deficient in protein. Iron, zinc, calcium, vitamin D, vitamins B12A, and omega-3 fats. A lot of grains and a lot of plant-based foods are fortified with a lot of these nutrients, so you don't necessarily have to be super concerned about the deficiencies there, as long as, again, you're eating a variety of different foods. And again, a lot of whole grains and stuff are fortified with iron and zinc and vitamins B12 and vitamin A. You can't, well, vitamin A comes only from animal sources directly, but your body can manufacture vitamin A from beta carotene, which we get from basically like orange and yellow foods. So pumpkin and melon and bell peppers and things like that have a lot of beta carotene, which we can then convert into vitamin A. So vitamin A deficiency is, again, not a big concern. All right. The FDA also has My Plate for Vegans, My Vegan Plate. So if you want to have a vegan healthy diet, we do have a lot of resources for how to do that in a safe and healthy manner. All right. Again, comparing fat is a big difference between vegetarian and especially red meat diet. So a tofu stir fry versus a beef stir fry, this is how everything um, uh, kind of matches up there. Not a huge difference other than zero cholesterol in the tofu, zero vitamin B12 though, which again you can get through fortified foods or supplementation. So it's not a dire deficiency there. Soy is a really the joy of soy. This is what it's called, nutrition in the real world. The benefits of soy are that, again, it's a high quality, low fat, complete protein. It contains isoflavones, which are good for your health. It has isoflavones are also called phytoestrogens. They have a chemical structure similar to human estrogen, which especially for people who are genetically female, it has a protective effect on your bones and a good effect on your blood pressure and all of that kind of stuff. Lowers our blood cholesterol levels and can reduce our risk of heart disease and certain types of cancers. Again, soy is really, really good for you. It's a great source, plant-based source of protein. Soy is more than just tofu and soy milk. Although tofu is good, it's pureed soybeans that are processed into this different textured kind of block of stuff. And it doesn't taste like anything, but it's really great because whatever you put on it, it will taste like. So you can marinate it in whatever you think tastes good, and the tofu will taste good. So it's great. Soy flour you can use to make baked goods. Edamame is a really great snack or a vegetable on the side. Soy milk. Tempeh is similar to tofu, only it's got a little bit more texture to it by having basically whole soybeans instead of like pureeing them. Soy-based or vegetable-based proteins that you can make like veggie burgers out of. Texturized veggie protein is used in a lot of that. Miso. So soy is very versatile. You can get it in lots of different sources with a lot of different textures and a lot of different flavors. All right, that's the end of our lecture for this week. So make sure that you keep up with your homework assignments and the 2 discussion boards this week. And as always, if you need anything, let me know.